Be the camel and the chimpanzee. Hey, kia ora. Helen Brahms taking me live from Sun City in Arizona. Hope you're all having a super fantastic sparkling day. Welcome to Before the Dirt Nap podcast, episode 1364. Yes Day. What is Yes Day? I'll have to stay tuned to find out. It was on this day. Now, yesterday we talked about Anzac Day, which was yesterday in New Zealand and Australia. So if you missed out on that, go back and see that one. But 78 years ago on this day, my husband's parents got married on the 25th of April, 1945. Then, so that was 78 years ago today. But then, 25 years ago today, it was a beautiful day in Northern Virginia, which is where we lived at the time. Oh, hang on. Yeah, 78 years ago today. Sorry, I was talking about 78 years ago. So my in-laws got married on this day 78 years ago. They just fascinating people. They really. I never got to meet my father-in-law. He had passed away long before I came along, so I never got to meet him in person. But I got to hear the stories. And one thing I loved about the stories is that my mother-in-law would sit there and tell us stories about their courtship, about their wedding, about their life, about the places they had traveled to, about the boys growing up. They had 4 boys, and Brad was the youngest. About stories about the boys growing up, and it was just really fascinating and interesting to listen to. But she was only young when she was very young when she got married, and she told us that she was living in Shreveport, Louisiana at the time. Caught a train from there up to Denver, Colorado. Got off the train, met up with my father-in-law. They'd already courted before this time, and he had already proposed to her. And he was in the U.S. Air Force. He was a dog trainer in the U.S. Air Force, and he had he was up in Denver, Colorado, which is where he was stationed at the time. And so she caught a train on the 25th of April, 1945, and took it from Shreveport, Louisiana. Well, actually, I don't know if she actually got on the train on that day or if it was the day before. But anyway, she got on a train from Shreveport, Louisiana, and took it all the way up to Denver. Got off the train in Denver, Colorado, and my father-in-law met her there, and they walked down to the registry office and got married. That's their wedding story. And that's where he was stationed at the time. But she left all of her family behind and took off on this big adventure. And we says, what happened if he wasn't going to meet you? She was just going to get back on the train and go back home again. Very practical woman. So that was the beginning of their married life together. And they had a lot of wonderful. They had 4 amazing boys. They've got amazing grandchildren. They now have great-grandchildren as well, and my mother-in-law got to meet the first of 4 grandchildren. So she got to meet the first of her great-grandchildren. So, and I have this lovely 4-generation picture that was actually taken on Brad's birthday, and Darmic was only 6 weeks old, I think it was, at the 6, 7, 8 weeks. Yeah, 6 weeks old. No, hang on, beginning of February, end of February. Yeah, about 7 weeks old. And he actually drove his mother. He was actually staying up with his mother in Los Angeles at the time when we were living in San Diego. And on his birthday, he drove his mother from LA down to our place in Solana Beach, so she got to see where we were living. And then Brandon and Nadia brought over Darmic, and we got some great photographs, 4-generation photographs taken of great-grandma holding her first great-grandchild. And sitting there with her grandson and her own son. So it was an awesome memory that day. And then we went out for lunch, and then Brad drove her back home to LA, and he came back he stayed up there the rest of the week and came back the following weekend. Yeah, he stayed up there the rest of the week. Then I went up the following weekend on the train and came home with him. And if he went up to stay with his mum to do some stuff for her, I would quite often catch the train up there, and he would meet me either at Union Station or Van Nuys Station, depending on what the trains were doing at the time. And then I would either stay the night or would get in the car and just drive home. But he wanted somebody to go in the HOV lane, so we could go in the HOV lane. That's basically the only reason I took the train up there, so he could come home in the HOV lanes. I know, crazy stories. So that was 78 years ago that my in-laws got married. So happy heavenly anniversary. 25 years ago today, it was a beautiful day in Northern Virginia, which is where we were living at the time, and like yesterday, and we were living in an apartment at the time, and it was before we moved into our house that Brad was. It was a brand new build that we were getting done, and so we went down to. So Brad said, "Oh, let's go out for dinner tonight." I went, "Okay." I says, "Where we're going?" He says, "I don't know. We'll go figure it out." He says, "Just go." We could never make a decision on dinner. What do you feel like for dinner? Oh, I don't know. What do you feel like? Oh, I don't know. Back and forth with that. What about Chinese? Yeah, no, I really don't feel like that. What about yeah, no. And so we go back and so he had a plan in his head, and so we got in the car and he drove us from Fairfax, which is where we were living at the time, over to Old Town Alexandria, and we parked the car, and he said, "Oh, let's just go for a walk. We'll go for a walk first. Maybe we'll find somewhere to eat along the way." And I was like, "Okay," because I had no idea what. This is 25 years ago. So you didn't have all of the Yelp reviews. You couldn't go online and go find the thing. Those things just weren't available at the time. And so we got in the car. So we drove down to the waterfront. We found a place to park, and then we went for wandering around and trying to figure out where to go. And there's lots of eating places in the areas, and we're walking up and down the streets and all that. And we ended up in this park that's next to the torpedo. The old torpedo factory, which I think now is an art gallery, I think it is. And so anyway, we're walking through this thing, and he says, "Oh, let's just sit here for a bit." I went, "Okay." And so we're sitting there, and I'm just enjoying all the atmosphere. There's people having picnics, people riding bikes. We're on the flight path to National Airport, to Reagan National Airport. We're on the flight path. And he said to me, he says, "Oh, just close your eyes." I'm looking and go, "Why?" He says, "Just close your eyes." I went, "Okay." So I closed my eyes, and he says to me, "Tell me what you can hear." And so I tune in my ears, and I said, "Well, I can hear people talking. People are riding their bikes," because you could hear the wheels crunching on the gravel paths. It was that fine gravel stuff that gets everywhere. And I could hear, and I was listening off these things that somebody was running. There was people running. There were people walking. There were people talking. And there was people riding the bike. And then the plane goes overhead as it's coming into land at Reagan National. I said, "There's a plane coming into land," and I'm like listening off all these things, and I can hear the children playing, and I go, and I'm like sitting there, I'm going, "What else can I hear?" And I said, "I think that's it." And I'm like listening again. I'm going, "No, that's it. That's it." And he turns around and says, "Well," he said, "there's one thing you haven't heard." So of course I'm sitting there going through my mind. There's people talking. There's kids playing. There's people riding bikes, running. And he pauses after he says that. Like I'm going through the checklist in my head of what I have just listed, and thinking, "Well, what else did I miss?" And he could tell I had this puzzled expression on my face because he's watching me the whole time. I'm still sitting there with my eyes closed, and he's on my left side as well. And he goes, "There's one thing that you didn't hear." And I'm like trying to figure out, what did I not hear? And I'm like, "I got this, I got that. Yeah, there's no other sounds." And he suddenly whispers in my ear, he says, "I love you. Will you marry me?" And with that, he slips my engagement ring on my hand. And I look at him and go, "Wait, what?" Total shock and surprise. And what really surprised me was that I had a full engagement ring on my hand. And the reason that surprised me was because a few months beforehand, we had gone to a jewelry show, and we were looking at different styles of rings without the center stone in them. And I liked the bypass rings. I actually should have put it on today before I got on here. But I liked the bypass rings. And so it had a marquee setting in there. And he knew that I was not a diamond girl. That I loved my sapphires. And we had actually, at the jewelry show, we had seen several bypass settings, and there were 3 that I kind of liked. And and then, but we found a sapphire, a marquee sapphire, and that I did like. And so we got the sapphire, and he says to me, he says, "Oh, I'll meet you out front. I just got to whip to the restroom because we're getting ready to leave." And I says, "Okay." And so I went out and waited outside for him, and then he comes out later on and says, "Come on, let's go." And he's taking a while. So, what the heck's he doing in there? And didn't know it at the time. But we bought the sapphire. So I had the sapphire in my. Did I have the sapphire? Yeah, I had the sapphire. No, he had the sapphire. I had the sapphire. And what I didn't know is that he didn't actually go to the restroom. He went back to one of the booths there and purchased the bypass ring. That the sapphire would fit in, because he had the measurements of the sapphire, And so he said, it needs to fit this size stone. They said, yep, we can make it do that. And so when I go home, he goes, oh, where's that sapphire? And I says, oh, it's here. He says, okay, I'll go put it away in the lockbox. And I'm like, okay. Little did I know. And my husband was so proud of this because I love to be in the kitchen all the time. I'm always cooking and everything else. And he was so proud of the fact that he actually snuck the ring and the stone out of the house, went and got it all set, put together and everything else, brought it back in and hid it in my kitchen. But I said to him, and he was so proud of the fact that he put it in my kitchen and I never found it. And I says, yes, but you have to tell the full story about the ring in the kitchen. And he's like, nope, I hid it in your kitchen and you never found it. I said, yes, but what he doesn't say when he tells people the story, when he told people the story, I said, what he leaves out is the fact that I'm only 5'4.5". He's 6'5". So he has a higher reach than I do. And our upper cabinets the bottom shelf was at eye level. And so I only used the first 2 shelves because I could reach those comfortably. And he put it in my spice cupboard. And my spice cupboard had a door about this wide, but it was in the corner. So it went this deep this way, but on the doorway. So you kind of had to reach around the corner. So what he did is he put it like on the 3rd or 4th shelf up around the corner where I would never see it. And that's how we used to hide gifts from each other. I would hide them low. He would hide them high. It worked out great. Because anyway, I'd find any stuff that he had got for me would be to get on a step ladder and go looking around the stuff that were at his reach height. Remember, 6'5", 5'4". And so he was very proud of the fact that he had the engagement ring in the spice cabinet. And he actually told me that that's what he had done with it after he proposed to me. And so, of course, I said yes. And crying, saying yes. And so then we got up and we walked. And we started walking again, and we came across this Irish pub. Now, I can't remember the name of the Irish. I want to say it was Murphy's Irish Pub, but I can't remember the name of the pub. It closed down at that location for a while, and there was this courtyard area in Old Town Alexandria, and it was on one side of the courtyard area. And its lease was up or something. It had been there for, oodles of years, and they closed that location down, and then they opened it up on the other side of the courtyard. This is well after we got engaged. So we were in the original spot for this Irish pub. And so we went in there and we sat down and got a table for 2 and just had a wonderful meal. I got fish and chips. Yeah, I'm a fish and chip girl. I love my fish and chips. So I got fish and chips and was busy reading the placemat. Still remember do I still have a copy? I think I swiped one of the placemats. I may still have a copy somewhere. But So I'm reading the placemat about the story of these Irishmen. There was a group of Irishmen, like about 5 of them, if I remember correctly. It's been a long time since I have read this story. So there was so it's going to be very paraphrased from what I can remember that I read 25 years ago. But basically it was about these, I think it was like 5 Irishmen who had been convicted. I think it was like treason. It was something that they would get executed for. It was under Queen Victoria's rule, and I think it was treason, but I know they were going to be executed. And there was such an uproar about them being executed that the Queen granted them, remove the execution thing and put them on the convict ship down to Australia. Fast forward a few years later, and Queen Victoria receives this letter, and the name looks familiar to her. So she has her people look into it. And it turned out that this guy who had some high government position in Australia was actually one of these 5 convicted guys that was writing to her. He was like the prime minister or governor general, or he was some high guy in the government there in Australia. So she got her people to do their research to find out what happened to these 5 Irishmen. And I remember that one, a couple of them, I think it was like 2 of them had held high seats in the Australian government. One of them was like the guy that oversaw the territory of Queensland. One was like a governor in Texas. And I can't remember who the fifth one was, but they all had these high government positions. Wherever they were in these high positions within the government of wherever they were. And so I'm just sitting there chuckling at this thing, and just having a blast reading this thing, and I'm like pointing it out to Brad and everything else. And then the owner of, and so we're enjoying our dinner. So by this time our dinner arrived, and we had a lovely dinner, and they had live music on, playing all these Irish folk songs and everything else. And I was surprised by how many I knew. But then I used to watch the Irish Rovers when I was growing up, and the Irish Rovers was this great band, and they used to have the Irish Rovers show used to be on TV in New Zealand for many years, and so a lot of the Irish songs I knew from that. And then the owner of the pub comes out, gets up on stage, and he's wearing. I had to try and figure out what it was. It turned out to be like a hood of a unicorn. It had this thing was so moth-eaten and this thing was well past its prime. But it was like he had this fur-covered hood that covered his head, went down over his shoulders, had the ears coming out, and then it had this really poor. It had the unicorn coming out that it was well past its prime time. It didn't sound straight. It kind of leaned to one side. But he got up and they sang the unicorn song. There were green alligators and long-necked geese, a humpy-backed camel and some chimpanzees. So they sung that song, and everybody, and the whole pub was like singing along with the chorus, singing along with the song. It was a fantastic evening. And it was just such great because a lot of the songs they sang, like I said, I knew. There were many people singing along with a lot of the songs. So it was a great sing-along time, a great way to celebrate our engagement. And that was 25 years ago tonight. So I kind of now have a thing that I need to go get some fish and chips. But you need to go for a walk first, don't you? You've got Zephyr here. So and then what I started doing is that every April 25th, on April 25th for all of the years up until while Brad was working, when he would actually leave the house and go to the office, I would pick up the phone on the morning of April 25th. I would call his work line, knowing that he was upstairs in bed asleep. His voicemail will kick in, and I'll go, yes, and hang up. And the first time I did it, he goes, why did you leave me a voicemail that said yes? And I said, well, what day is it? And he looks at me and goes, well, it's April 25th today. And I went, oh, what happened on April 25th? And he's sort of like, well, I don't know. I says, really? Didn't you? I said, why would I say yes? What would I be saying yes to? And I had to kind of encourage him along. But it was a few weeks later, when I was doing some genealogy stuff, that I discovered that April 25th, 1945 was his parents' wedding anniversary. So that was a kind of a special day. So not only did you have the invasion of Gallipoli by the Anzacs on April 25th in 1915, you had his parents' wedding anniversary on 25th of April in 1945. They got married, and then the 25th of April 1998, Brad and I got engaged. So that's our story. That's why today is called Yes Day, because every year I would pick up the phone, leave voicemail, and say yes. When he was no longer working at an office job at home, I would just send him a text message in the morning with capital letters that said YES with an exclamation point, and would send him that text message. Now, since he's passed, I just post it on Facebook as a yes and tag him on the post. Even if I got taken back in time to that same day, knowing what I know now, would I still say yes? Absolutely. Absolutely. Even if at that time I knew that he was going to be passing in a few years, I would still say yes, because it was the time that we got to spend together. It was the adventures that we had together. And if I went back in time and did not say yes, look at all the stuff I would have missed out on. We had a great life together. We had our ups and downs like any married couple does. We had our challenges that we got through, but I wouldn't change one moment. If I knew 25 years ago that he would be passing, almost 20 years later, I wouldn't change a thing. I would still say yes. Or the answer on 25th of April will always be yes. Have a super fantastic sparkling evening, and we'll catch you guys back here tomorrow evening at 6 p.m. Pacific. Hekonera.